our segue into our first
Sorry.
topic then, because we can't.
Didn't mean to spoil.
But yeah, so the big news this week that's kind of shocking, well, shocking some people in the industry, has been Telltale Games is basically on death's door. They have recently let go over 225 of their 250 employees. They have canceled The Wolf Among Us, the end of The Walking Dead Season 3, and they are basically at this point like one little push away. They are beyond circling the drain. I think they are in the drain right now. And as we said on the video, my condolences definitely go out to everyone who was let go, and hopefully they will be able to bounce back. Considering the pedigree of Telltale, I think that's going to be a major part of our discussion. You would think, like, I'm sure those people are going to find jobs fairly easily, but as a very not so nice point, it was revealed that the people who were let go were not only not given a severance package, but they were basically given no heads up that the company was closing. They basically went in Thursday and was told, we're closing, you're fired, go home,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Which is a very mean way of, that's never a good sign when a company has done that. And getting to Sungum's point, he was talking about they were a money printing machine, and that's always been one of the very interesting dichotomies behind Telltale. And I'm sure as you've done game producing as well, you've probably thought about this as well, that Telltale has always, from the outside, looked at as being, this marquee game company. They got the Universal Studios license and made Back to the Future. They revitalized Sam & Max. I mean, hell, The Walking Dead. How many YouTubers, streamers, and consumers have heard of that series?
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at things from the inside, though, the company has definitely had major issues. And I'll talk about some of the things that I've heard, but I won't get to you, Rob. So what do you think about the whole closing of Telltale?
Well, I think the most surprising thing to me when I looked into the articles a little more deeply was the size of the company. I did not expect that to be a 250 employee
Yeah.
size company, but given the amount of content they were pumping out at their apex, oops, sorry, given that amount of content that they were putting out, I guess it makes sense, and maybe that was part of the problem. How much content they were really just trying to get out there as fast as possible, because there was a point at which they just had like I want to say like 6 or even 7 series going on simultaneously. I could be completely wrong there and miscounting, but it did seem like they just had a lot coming out. And I know the complaint early on was that they all were very cookie cutter, that the strategies were all very similar, the puzzles were all very similar. And I noticed that early on when I was playing Back to the Future and Sam and Max, those reboots. But at the same time, it's like it's point and click adventure. It's something that I really love, and I'm glad is back. But I never thought that company would be as large as it was. Knowing other companies that are of that size and what they're putting out, they're usually just putting out like one very large, very high quality title or a couple, but not. That just seems like almost a mobile games approach.
And a lot of good points there, and also what Oscar and Viking were saying in chat as well about kind of again that like the two-facedness of Telltale. On one side, they have all this very big name attached to them, but again, like there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and as you and the chat were talking about, it did get very cookie cutter. There have been like little reports and like back door, back alley kind of discussions about them, but a lot of people have said that following the success of The Walking Dead, that kind of caused management to say, this is it. We are going to put our flag down on this kind of design going forward and nothing else. And going back to your point, you said about them bringing back point-and-click adventure games. That has always been one of their biggest claims to fame, and why so many adventure game designer fans and developers have been, lamenting and mourning this news. I know Dave Gilbert from Watchet Eye. Hey, Jan Shvek, too. Dave Gilbert from Watchet Eye was making a post about how sad he is that the company went out, because, again, if we didn't have Telltale, I think the adventure game genre would be a far different place. Because, like we said, they were kind of the studio that brought this back in terms of mainstream. Now, I, of course, got in when they were doing Sam and Max, but I know people who love them when they did Bone and, of course, Tales from Monkey Island. Now, as you were saying, their design has been cookie cutter. And I think with the Sam and Max and the Monkey Island games, what kind of helped them was the branding. Because again, when we look at Sam and Max, the last game was Hit the Road, which I think was 94, 96, somewhere around there. And I love Sam and Max. I thought the writing was great, the voice acting was good. And they've always had, this is a question for you, Rob, and this is one for the chat as well. They've always had this very weird sense of production values. On one hand, they get some very talented voice actors for their games. Troy Baker, Laura Bailey. I forget the name of the woman who played. Oh, this is good. What was the name of the character in The Walking Dead that everybody loves? Ooh, the girl.
Oh, that I don't know. That
I
don't
good.
know.
Well, that's
The Walking
great.
Dead is not my. Was never my thing.
We'll piss off all the Telltale fans together this week.
Yes, there we go.
Clementine, thank you, Sungam. Yeah, and so like they get these very talented voice actors, they do all the stuff on that end, but all their games have this very like cheap quality to them. Was it you or I think you said this a few minutes ago that it kind of felt like a very Oscar El Gordo said this too about it kind of was like mobile game approach that all their games kind of felt very like cheaply made. And I was just wondering, what do you think about that? And would you agree with that, or do you think I'm being different there?
I don't think you are. I think that it comes down to, and this is all assumptions, and I really hope that if I'm wrong, and someone out there from Telltale can correct me, please do so. But it felt like they had an engine that they didn't do much adjusting to, and maybe they did behind the scenes, but they iterated so much on releases, as I said, that they really just kept the same thing, probably, and just went on story and puzzles and just taking that franchise and making it larger and larger, and with small bite size like installations, episodes. And certainly that was unique for a while, but at the same time, I think people have gone away from episodic, and maybe that's part of the problem, is that you see these tiny games, and as one-offs, they might not be that exciting. So you wonder if it wouldn't be better if they just spent the time to do all of them at once, really perfect that engine. Because those old games in the 90s, they were not cheap. They were very great artwork, great animation.
Oh, yes.
Exceptional writing, and just tons and tons of locations to visit and different things to do, and a great sense of humor. And that's not to say that the sense of humor and the writing wasn't there, and certainly, as you mentioned, the voice acting. But at a certain point, I feel like it can all start to feel the same. It can all start to look the same.
Yeah.
And really what they were leaning on was their writing. And at a certain point, when there's just not enough writing, it just might not be worth diving into. There's way bigger games that are way more polished, and competing with that, especially even in the adventure game genre, because there are some excellent adventure games out there.
Yes.
They're like from German companies, from European countries, I would say, and
Daedalic, I think they're called. Something like that. They're a big one. And again, I mentioned Wadget Eye. They've been doing really well. I think Sungam and I just mentioned at the same time. And I want to go back to the discussion about episodic game or episodic design in a minute, but there's one also thing I want to clarify as well about Telltale. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people didn't realize, including myself until about a year or so ago, is that Telltale today, or I should say more specifically, Telltale The Walking Dead era and beyond, is a lot different than Telltale at the Sam and Max and Bone era. Because people have talked about, I'm sure this will probably get out more as time goes on, that there was a major restructure of the company. A lot of the people who founded it and were there at day one are no longer part of Telltale. And I know one of them, she actually does PR now. I don't want to mention her name just because, I don't want to be that kind of guy there, but she was telling me about Twitter that, a lot of the people who grew up or was part of day one of Telltale are no longer at the company. And it's kind of transformed, again, about you can put the face of the company out there. You can say, oh, Telltale's the same now as it was 5 years ago, but behind the scenes, it was a far different place to work. And I think a lot of that also kind of contributed to this issue of, this kind of like changing the guard for the company.
Mm-hmm. And certainly that's always a painful thing to go through. And it sounds like they just either did it too late or it just kind of broke them either way.
Yeah. And it's one of those things we've talked about this before. I know with your experience as well with warning as an independent company and being as part of some of the major studios, just how much the company culture is affected by the people. And it's one of those very weird things about the game industry, because when we look at a AAA studio, losing one person, losing 5 people is not that big of a deal, especially if you're a company of 100, 200 people. From an independent side, though, as we all know, if you're a 5-man company and you lose 3 people, it's pretty much a whole different place.
Yeah.
But
even adding that many people,
yeah.
it changes things drastically.
Mm-hmm. And it's always, again, this is one of those things I think a lot of people on the consumer side don't really either think about or don't really know as well. Outside of maybe like the Call of Duty example, that they know that it's Sledgehammer and that other studio who make Call of Duty, they switch off every year or so. But even then, it's very hard, I think, to really understand just how much the studio culture can impact things, especially when you still see games coming out. Because again, for a lot of people on the consumer side, I am sure they are just, blindsided that one day Telltale's this amazing company putting out all these great games, and then 24 hours later, they're dead.
Yeah. And per Sun's comment about being a managerial problem, I mean, certainly that sounds like it could be the case. Now, when I read the article on Gamasutra, it did mention like this one of the former the major players. I don't know if he was CEO or a step below that, but he was described in kind of an offhand comment that he was a very poisonous presence. Now, not to say he's not a great person or a very smart person, but even that can like poison a certain segment of the company, and that makes it very difficult. Talking to some of my experiences in the past, I did work for THQ Wireless about a year or 2 years before THQ went out of business. I worked for Disney Games for a while, and then they're no longer there. But in that 18 months, and I feel like this is towards the company culture thing. In the 18 months that I worked there, and I was in a very segmented educational team, we were like 4 people. 18 months, there were 3 different CEOs of the company. 3. So I got there, the first guy left, they brought in another guy, and then, some time went by, and then he left and another guy came in. And every time someone of that level comes in, especially given like a lot of the way American companies tend to go, I don't know about internationally, but someone comes in and wants to put their stamp on everything. So they'll lay off people, they'll bring in new people, and you have this unsettling kind of just constant shift in everything going on. And again, I was this tiny little team that no one cared about educational games there. It was just us. So the rest of the games, like big creative projects, Epic Mickey was going on at the time. Like you had these people involved in these very big, like I want to be on that project type projects, and there's a lot of politics. There's this like they set up the cubicles one day to kind of segment this like square area, and that's where the secret project was, and no one could go in there except the people on that project. And it was just so weird. Like 10 feet away, I could not walk through that space, and it was just ridiculous. So it's all these little things that you never ever hear about that happen that trigger people. And with if someone up there at Telltale was like, or Telltale was just like, let's put the foot on the pedal and let's just make as many games as possible and let's grab the best IP we can. Well, suddenly you got a lot of lawyers in the mix, a lot of marketing people in the mix, and it becomes more about pumping out the series than it does about making a good game. And so you fall into that cookie cutter type thing because you don't have time to innovate.
Yeah. And going back to James Ranko's comment about he's more concerned about The Walking Dead, I think unfortunately we're going to have to say goodbye to that to The Walking Dead at this point.
Yeah.
Although at this point though, it remains to be seen if they may sell off their IPs or their licensing for it as well. So maybe another studio will pick things up. We don't know.
Yeah, and it could very well be, people from Telltale. I mean, there's no there, like I would not have any doubt that that would happen,
Mm-hmm.
because the studios still have connections with like people still have connection with each other, whether or not the actual studios do. And you have this contract out there, and they're like, well, our games people liked them, so why not? At least maybe even the production company for Walking Dead brings them on, and they just make it in house.
Yeah, you never know.
It's a lot of things could happen there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be interesting to keep an eye out.
Yeah. Now, talking about like the corporate head, kind of, what's that expression? The crap rolls downhill or starts at the head kind of thing. One of the more interesting developments that was revealed on Twitter was that there was discussions with Telltale and Netflix to acquire the Stranger Things license and make a Stranger Things episodic adventure game. But the corporate side of Telltale shut it down because they thought that was just this thing about kids on bikes. Like no one at the head knew what Stranger Things were.
Wait, what? How hard is it to watch a like 6 episodes of a Netflix series? I mean,
I still
that's
haven't
ridiculous.
seen it yet, too.
I mean, the thing is, like, if this is the way I always handled things. Like, I worked on SpongeBob SquarePants game. Had never watched SpongeBob SquarePants. I watched every single episode. I worked on oh gosh, well, at Disney, I worked on all their properties. I watched as many of the princess movies. I watched Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and Jake and the Neverland Pirates. And boy, watching some of those programs just makes your mind kind of melt, because it's just meant for like toddlers. But that's how you get your head wrapped around how the series goes. When I worked on an NHL game, like I never did anything with hockey. I watched a couple games as a kid, but I grew up in the desert, So, but then I went and studied everything. Like, how hard is it when you have a big IP coming? Just watch a few episodes like that. I only watched the first couple episodes of Stranger Things. It hooks you like right away. It's interesting. Oh, jeez. I hope that's not true. I hope that's not true what you said.
Well, we'll see. And going back to a comment, like as we've been talking about IPs, Vikings said this a few minutes ago about the IPO was probably taking a hefty cut too. I think that's another big point. I know when I spoke with John Brieger, who does play testing, he's worked with licensing for like NASA for a tabletop game he was working on. He talked about some of the challenges of working with IP holders, and one of the big things, of course, is the fact that they are going to take a cut out of anything that you make. And with Telltale, I mean, for a time they were like, it always seemed like they had 3 or 4 games being developed all at the same time. Like, I never really heard. I guess for you, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but was there ever a period with Telltale that they were just working on one game? And this was, we're talking about, after The Walking Dead.
Oh, even before, like when talking about Sam and Max. Now that might have been on its own for the very shortest period of time, but as soon as they went with Back to the Future and Monkey Island, like it just all of a sudden their IPs exploded. And as far as The Walking Dead, I don't know. I'll go with Sun on this one. But even that, when you talk about IP, you're absolutely right. It's costly. You don't necessarily share profits, but you do have a major out-of-pocket expense.
Yeah. And the whole, when I spoke with John about this, the whole benefit or the reason why you do this is that it allows your game to reach a far greater audience because of that branding. Because someone who's interested in Game of Thrones, they're going to look at anything Game of Thrones related, just like anything Batman or Borderlands. But the problem is if you're not converting those people, then you're just basically giving up a portion of your profit for nothing. And I know it's been reported that Telltale has not had a profitable game or a game that has earned back its money since The Walking Dead. And that is another big point. I mean, it reminds me when I spoke with Chris Park from Arkin about how AI Wars was not only their best-selling game, but it's the game that basically kept them afloat because none of their other games are able to earn enough to make a profit as well. And again, that's one of those things that most consumers don't think about. They think, oh, the studio makes a video game. I'm sure it's earned at least enough money to break even. No, that's
Yeah.
not always guaranteed.
No, no. I mean, I firsthand experience
Yeah.
with that, but yeah, and in terms of the IP, not only do you have that, but there's legal fees,
Mm-hmm.
and there's creative differences. Like
Mm-hmm.
with Disney, the route is,
Mm-hmm.
you buy rights to the IP, and then you have to follow rigidly
Oh
Disney's like
yes.
creative, like everything. So I don't know how The Walking Dead works, but I can only imagine they're just like, okay, well, this character can never say this, and this can happen, and we get review. So you have to not only make the game quickly, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to give it to us for a full-on review. At which point we can say, negate anything you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it all kind of works together to make it difficult, and the contract structure at the very beginning, like what was that about?
Mm-hmm.
um like if they lock themselves into a super long contract, that might be a huge problem.
Yeah, and
you know
and that was one of the weird things because I remember when they announced the Universal Studios contract. I was like, "Oh, we got this, and we got three different games coming out, right? All based on that." So, yeah, that's the other thing. Like, how many games are they kind of locked into? Now, obviously, with The Walking Dead, that being their bread and butter, I'm sure they pursued. They made sure to keep that one. Lock, step, and barrel. But what about stuff like The Wolf Among Us or Guardians of the Galaxy and so on and so forth. Like, just like how much are they really locked into that? Because as you were just saying there, Rob, like the IP holder has final say, not just in terms of content, but how many games. If they say we want you to make 5 games based off of Mickey Mouse, then your studio is going to be making 5 games off of Mickey Mouse, or you're going to breach that contract.
Yeah, and not I'm sure it's not always like
Mm-hmm.
the studio's final say. I mean, there's plenty of games
Yeah.
out there that pretty much showcase that they don't care about the IP at all.
Oh yes.
But, the larger companies definitely do. And, if you break that, you're basically, putting your middle finger up to the companies that, like, the creative teams that originally wrote those characters.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, fans will call you on it big time.
Oh yes. And yet, nothing says a sound marketing strategy like raising a middle finger to Disney Marvel right now. That would be very smart. Just go up to Marvel and say, "Screw you, we don't care. What are you going to do, right?"
Yeah, and son, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, companies getting that big are constantly on the brink of crashing. And really, I think we've discussed this a while ago about smaller companies. When a small company becomes a big company,
Mm-hmm.
if the people at top don't know how to do it or don't hire the help that can do it, it'll crash. It,
Yep.
it will. There's no saving that.
Yep. And I mean that could easily be a topic in of itself discussing that. But I was mentioning this on the video that uh, it's very hard for a lot of independent companies to kind of transition once they break out. Like I've said this before, but I'm always curious whenever somebody has their big name game, their Undertale, their Five Nights, whatever. I want to know what they do after that, because that to me is the telling point whether or not that company can succeed or fail. Because
Hmm.
as you said, Robin, as I'm sure we have talked about many times over, that it's very hard to stay in this industry. And like people like Jake Burgett, Cliff Harris, and even studios like Kit Fox, Arkin, Clay Entertainment, like it is very challenging to keep yourself going as a company. And it's very, and going back to Sungam's point again about how they're on the brink of collapsing or crashing, it's very hard sometimes to understand or even see that. I mean, with Arkin, for instance, I spoke with Chris on 2 separate occasions, and he was telling me how his company was on the verge of bankruptcy 2 separate times. And it's just like that very scary prospect. And like you were just saying, Rob, if you don't know how to manage a company or manage a checkbook and budget, you are in deep trouble. Because the goodwill and profit from one game is not infinite. Even something like Fortnite will eventually begin to peter out. Probably not in the next 2 to 3 months, obviously. But if you think that Fortnite's going to last for 10 to 15 years in terms of that profit, I don't see that happening.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, you can go back to Zynga. They
Hmm.
have. I feel like they had that problem. I mean, you have that hit, and you can basically say, I have enough money to last for 15 years doing whatever I want.
Hmm.
And after that 15 years, you realize that whatever you wanted just didn't do it for you,
Yep.
didn't make you enough money, and now you're kind of struggling as things go. And per Sun's point, yeah, you invest in projects at all times, and you just have to be smart. And I feel like that does come from management.
Yep.
Like you have to know what projects are going to do well for you. And I've seen too many times
Hmm.
companies, and the smart ones do this. You know, they'll go with, okay, so we want to do an original IP on the side, and then they realize, wait, this is not going to make us money, and so they go back, they cancel it, and they go back to focusing on
Yep.
like the term used, bread and butter. You know,
Yep.
so it's about balancing the two. I know tons of third party developers. I feel like they're the traditional third party developer story is, we're only doing this because we want to make our own IP eventually, and so many problematic things come out of that. But
Hmm.
eventually, the good companies embrace who they are and just focus on that instead of just trying to do everything.
Yeah, and this is some really good conversation because it actually will segue into our second topic
Yeah.
at some point today. I don't know when we'll get to it, but yeah, it's always tough to sustain yourself as a company, and that actually takes me to another really good point that somebody was talking about on a forum I visited, that they related Telltale to harmonics during the rock band, plastic music craze. And that's another very strange thing because, again, we both were around during the rock band Guitar Hero era. Like, that was like, what,
Yeah.
like 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that.
God.
And that took over. You thought Fortnite was crazy? That was like the last decade's equivalent of Fortnite. All of a sudden, everybody loved Guitar Hero and harmonics. Again, they went from like here to all the way up there almost overnight.
Mhm.
And from Guitar Hero came Rock Band. From Rock Band, we saw the Beatles Rock Band. I mean, again, that's another good point. We talk about games that seem too big to fail. The Beatles Rock Band failed hard for harmonics, as reports say. It just did not generate the money. And again, part of that was due to that licensing. You can bet that they asked for a lot of money to get the Beatles songs into a video game.
Yeah.
And what happened again, and what we were kind of seeing as that analog to Telltale, was that they created this niche for themselves that it just never really managed to do anything else with it. Because with Guitar Hero became Rock Band, then Rock Band became Rock Band 2, then Rock Band 2 became Rock Band 3. And I know a lot of people that I've spoken to are fans of like the whole plastic controller era. They turned hard onto Rocksmith. They felt like Rocksmith was like the true innovator of that genre. I know Rocksmith, I think, is still going on today. I still see people buy like 20, 30 songs at a time.
Yeah. And I want to comment real quick on El Gordo talking
Hmm.
about the Tony Hawk games.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of funny because Neversoft, who created Tony Hawk, eventually got the Guitar Hero license.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, so they did Guitar Hero 3, maybe even 2, I forget.
I think it
So,
was 3. I think they were, Harmonix was still doing it at 2.
gotcha. So it's just weird how it all
Yeah.
intertwines.
Yeah, and that's the strange thing. Like, Guitar Hero kind of took its own way. It became more for like the score chasing with the music rather than just about you playing the songs. And I know Harmonix tried to do, I think this was about 2 to 3 years ago, they tried to do a fake campaign to get Rock Band on the PC. And it failed. It was in 2016 that they were trying to get a $1.5 million campaign to bring Rock Band 4 to the PC, and it just failed horribly. And again, it was one of those issues where you're basically competing with yourself. Because with each new Rock Band game, you had to buy another set of plastic controllers. I know I have like 3 different guitars around here. And it just got to a point of, why should I buy your next game? And
Yeah.
bringing this back to Telltale, and we'll get to episodic design in a minute, but it was like, if I didn't like The Wolf Among Us, or if I didn't like The Walking Dead, Why should I play Tales from the Borderlands? Why should I play Guardians of the Galaxy or Game of Thrones if all you're doing is just taking that same formula and just slapping a different coat of paint on it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is a painful thing to realize when you're playing. Like again, I did this with Sam and Max and Monkey Island and Back to the Future. I did buy the Back to the Future series, and yeah, it's a little disappointing because you remember those games were so great, and then they can't seem compressed, and you just are walking through a formulaic puzzle game. And then with Back to the Future, it's I mean, it's really cool and clever what they did, and I think they did a good job with the characters, but it is kind of it's shoehorned.
Yeah. And again, like when it comes to that level of quality, as you were saying a few minutes ago regarding the fans, they expect a quality product. They don't want something, slapped together. And that's the issue when it comes to branding. If you're, as you were saying a few minutes ago, when developers try to experiment with something that doesn't work, if your in-house project doesn't come together and you cancel it, okay, it sucks, but you didn't invest too much in it. If the game that you promoted to every fan of The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones fails, you've got all those fans now looking at you saying, you just ruined my favorite brand, how dare you?
Yeah, going back to THQ again. They had a little bit of that.
Okay, let me see. So, I think we'll wrap up this section talking about the episodic games. Well, this could probably be its own hour-and-a-half podcast on about Telltale. But as we were talking about earlier in this discussion, the episodic formula has been one of the very weird aspects of what came from the adventure game genre, even from smaller studios. Again, for us who started following Telltale last decade, and even before then, episodic gameplay or episodic structure was considered to be this, the changing of how game development was supposed to be. This was going to be the wave of the future and all that, and it didn't even just go out with a bang. It just like quietly disappeared. And only Telltale, I think, at this point is still really carrying that structure. And I have my own thoughts on it, but I want to throw it over to you, Rob. What did you make of episodic storytelling, episodic video games?
I mean, it was interesting. It was interesting at first. I thought to myself, well, it makes sense on paper. It makes sense. I mean, television has episodes and games really have sequels, so why not kind of marry the two a little bit? But at the same time, when the game is short, like let's say I watch TV. Back in the day, and still today, these for the most part, I would have to wait a week to watch my favorite program. I'd turn on the TV at 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday, and I could watch whatever was on. Was it like Seinfeld or Friends or whatever for the longest time? So that was how it was. But then Netflix comes along, and they're like, you know what? We're giving all the episodes to you at once, and everyone loves it. Everyone loved being able to watch everything at the same time and be done with it, getting that whole experience. And so you kind of translate that, and you're like, well, the innovation in TV was to get rid of episodic, and the change in games was to add episodic. And I do think that in the end, people just want the one whole experience, or at least they want a lot of content at once to get through. And that's the way things are going. And really, if you step back from it, MMO was kind of the wave of the future, and that's still what seems to be plaguing. And this will go into the next topic, I think. Making as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, the whole idea of the binging of television has been a major part, and again, it's been a major part of Netflix's success. And I think I agree with El Gordo there about too little content, too much weight in between. Because one of the issues that we saw with a lot of episodic games is that you're getting like almost like a 16th of the whole experience, and then you have to wait 2 to 3 months, or even more than that. And this was one, going back to Telltale, this is one of the things I think a lot of people complained about on was the fact that from the beginning, they're setting this up as an episodic game, but there was still like 3 to 6 months wait in between each episode.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that weird dichotomy or contradiction of, yes, they're using the same engine. They're not really elevating that. So why is it taking so much time in between each episode?
Yeah. Yeah, the time to wait was a big deal, especially when you get back to the cookie cutter
Yep.
thing. You waited all that time and you're just basically getting the same experience.
Yeah. And like with that kind of episodic structure, like one of the issues I think again with that cookie cutter design was you never really saw iteration or elevating this design. Because I know what I'm going to see in episode 1 of The Walking Dead is basically going to be what I'm going to be seeing in episode 3 or 4 or 5. Like, they weren't really giving me anything new. I think that's one of the very interesting parallels between video game episodic and television episodic. And I want to get everybody's thoughts on this. One of the things that we've seen with television, and especially with what a lot of people call like the golden age of TV, is how these series can grow and change over the course of their series. Again, stuff like The Shield, The Wire, Breaking Bad, or even what I like to watch with Legion. Like, these are shows that over the course of their season or their series, it becomes a fundamentally different show. Things grow and change. Even something like Doctor Who would be an example. Whenever they have a new Doctor, like I think the next series is going to be airing next month or the month after that with the first female Doctor. Each time they throw in a new Doctor, it changes the entire course of that series. You're not yes, it's the same overall structure, but it's going to be different. But when we look at something like, again, like Telltale's approach, you may have different seasons of The Walking Dead, different episodes, but it's not really changing. It's not really growing. Yes, they make Clementine a little bit older, or they throw in some another character, but are the stakes really changing from season 1 to season 3? I don't think they really are.
And that's the funny thing when you talk about all that. Game of Thrones even up the ante by basically saying, "Oh, you like this character? He's dead."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it automatically changes everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you can't change the story on a series that actively makes you, like, forces you to do that, yeah, things are a little weird.
Yeah. And again, going back to what you said with the design, I know this is another comment I saw on Twitter that once people started to realize, I know the same thing for me, I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people watching us right now, once we kind of saw behind the curtain and realized that our choices don't matter. It doesn't matter who we pick, the story's going to end up the same way. It was like, why bother playing? Like, it just never really struck to me that why should I keep playing this when it's just going to be the same story no matter what I do. Yes, little bits and pieces will change, but the people who are going to die are going to die. The people who are going to be leaving the series, they're going to be leaving the series. Nothing that I do is really going to change things.
Yeah. Yeah, and to God's house, yeah, it's not about liking or not liking The Walking Dead. It's just about how playing the games, the adventure games based on the series, might have been a disappointing experience.
Yeah.
Now, and that again, I can't directly talk to, but I can talk to their other games, their other experiences that I was disappointed by.
Yeah. Like, I think it's kind of a different thing when we talk about their older games, like Sam and Max. Of course, we know they're not going to kill Sam and Max, episode 2, and say, oh, Sam and Max are dead, we're never going to do another one. But it was more about the journey there. We know Sam and Max are going to be fine, but it's just, what the hell is going to happen to them over the course of the season? I mean, Season 1 dealt with a plot to take over the world. Season 3 had this whole Lovecraftian madness, which I thought was very interesting to say the least. But we didn't know what to expect. We knew they were going to come out fine. We just didn't know what the whole journey was.
Mm-hmm.
And like with The Walking Dead, some of their later games, it was like, yeah, we know they're not going to kill the Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, they're not. I'm sure Marvel told them, yeah, Star-Lord and the whole crew, they're going to be fine at the end of this. So, what was left to go for other than the writing? But that writing, as we've said before, can only take you so far. And, like, I played the first episode, or did I play the first episode? Yeah, I don't think I even finished the first season of Batman. I thought, yeah, the acting was good, but why should I care about any of this? It just feels like a movie to me.
Yeah, that is a struggle that adventure games have had for a long time. Is it feels like you don't have too much control other than problem solving,
Yeah.
and yeah, then it becomes about the entertainment and the creativity they can put behind the problem solving.
Yeah. But as we've been saying with Telltale, they removed the problem solving. So what else is there?
Yeah,
And I think this is why I think for like myself and for a lot of fans, we kind of transitioned over to like Watchet Eye and a lot of the independent games that have been doing a much better job of having that marriage between storytelling and gameplay.
yeah.
Now, one last point that I have, and now I'll throw it to you, Rob, and then we'll move on to our next section. And that was, I think El Gordo brought this up like 5 to 10 minutes ago regarding Hitman structure. As we all know, the last Hitman game went with an episodic format, and it actually worked really well for them. I think it was one of their best-selling games from Island Interactive, so much so that even though they're no longer being published by Square Enix, that they kept that brand. They're still moving forward with this episodic structure for Hitman Season 2. And while the Hitman games have never really done it for me, and that is a discussion, for another day, they managed to do episodic content right. Did you have a chance to play it or to look at that, Rob?
No, I didn't. I'll have to check it out now. It sounds interesting. It does. It sounds fascinating.
I'm going to pull up their store page really fast to see if I can just glean how they did it. 1 second. It's time for that live research section, folks.
We need music accompaniment for this.
Exactly. So I'm pulling it up. Come on, game, or come on, Steam. Don't mess with me here. So they just had like a few pieces of DLC, but the main part about how they did was, while I was looking at it, El Gordo was filling us in there. Yeah, I don't like time-sensitive content, and that's easily another topic. But what they did was they made these episodes like a Hitman level is not just about the story; it's about the sandbox of you're Agent 47. Figure out how to kill your target. So each episode was very meaty in that regard, and it was meant to be replayed. I mean, a major part from what I saw when I tried Hitman was it wasn't just about kill the target. It was like, can you accomplish these other objectives? Can you kill the target without killing anyone else? Can you get silent assassin rating? Can you kill your target using a rubber chicken? Can you kill your target using a chandelier? So each episode had that value to it. It wasn't like a Telltale game where you play the first episode and then it's like, why should I play it again?
Yeah.
Here, each episode was its own self-contained, very involved experience. And you were getting each episode, over every, I think it was like, I want to say 3 to 6 months, but I think it may have been a smaller timetable than that. But I'm looking it up here, like they had a total of 6 episodes, looks like a bonus campaign. Each episode looks like $7. Now, and I think this is the final part of what I want to think about episodic gameplay, and then we'll move on. It was very hard, I think, to come up with the pricing for it. Because again, the retail experience is a $50 or $40 game. But how do you cut things up like that?
I don't know how they do it. I know for the Telltale stuff, I did think about this for a while, and adding up all of the experiences, and it did wind up costing a good amount. Compared to, say, the original Secret of Monkey Island, it still wasn't close to the full experience, and that comes out to a bit of a problem.
And let me see here. Oop, I just lost chat on my side. Yep. Yeah, I think that's another good point there, Laura, that it ended up, if we do the pricing right, 7 times 6, so about $48-50, maybe a little bit more than that, thereabouts, for what the entire Hitman season will have cost you. And that was one of their major points, was that the full game was going to be about $50, and that got you everything. But if you just wanted to buy things piecemeal, you could do that as well. And I know they did have some delays in terms of episodes, so once they kind of got, themselves a accustomed to it, they were putting them out pretty rarely. And it's always hard, I think, to do that. I guess here's a question for you, Rob. I don't know if you would have the answer to this, but I'm curious. What do you think is easier? Building a game like as a structure, like piecemeal, like this, knowing that it's going to be each episode, or having to develop the entire thing in like a single span, or creating like a full game?
What's easier?
Yeah.
I think the latter. I think making it all at once is easier for a lot of reasons. When you do episodic, you're either going to have to innovate crazy, or you're stuck. Like with The Walking Dead, right? Let's say you were doing it in the Walking Dead universe. If a character gets killed off, like in the story, then he's going to get killed off in the story. But if you're playing like a party-based game and like one of your characters gets killed off. If you're doing episodic, well, you have to figure out a way to make the game work without that character. Or you go back to the whole thing where it's just, it's formulaic, and game B starts where game A ended. And that it's episodic in terms of a show, but it's not episodic in terms of a video game, because you have no control over the end part. And that becomes a problem.
Yep, and it just reminded me of one other game I was playing this year, The Council. It's an episodic adventure mystery game where how your character, and this is what I thought was very interesting, your conversation options and your clues that you get are all based on your character's specialties and their profession. And you grow them by completing different tasks or searching for things. While the overall story stayed the same, how you would get your information or solve puzzles over the different episodes changed based on how you played your character. I only played the first episode of it, but I thought that was a very interesting touch in terms of giving the player more malleability in terms of the experience.
Yeah, and that is difficult. It's difficult enough in an adventure game to give a wide range of possibilities. It's even more difficult to have to make a second game that it carries all of that over, because it just there's so many possibilities by the end.
Permutations, yep.
Yeah, so like even a binary choice at the end of one episode, by the end of the season, you're up to like, if it's 8 episodes, it's 2 to the 8th power, right? So you're up to, what is it? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 250, 256. There you go. So
I'm glad you did the math there, Rob. Thank you.
I mean, it's 256 different possibilities by the end of episode 8, even if it's just a yes or no at the end of one episode.
And going back to Telltale, that's been their whole formula is, oh no, 5 minutes before the episode ends, there's going to be this major choice that's going to set things down either path A or path B. And that was pretty much it. Everything else, though, doesn't matter. Again, we've joked about that whole, he will remember this, meaning absolutely nothing. It was just sleight of hand. But this section has been going on almost for its own cast, so let's wrap it up here and move on to our weird game. So I've already said my piece about what I thought about Telltale, so I'll let you have the final word, Rob.
Okay, I mean, the final word is that everything we've said negative, though we did go on the negative for a while. On the whole, I feel like Telltale was a great thing, and a great company in America. An adventure game company is going to be a tough sell. They managed to do it. Certainly, they had their troubles, and it ended suddenly without warning, and it was something that is sad. And I would have liked Telltale to be around a while, because it was interesting. It was a cool thing to talk about, and if they were in the middle of rounding the corner and making a change, then it's a sad thing that we missed it.
All right.